I found a town in the middle of the desert. The inhabitants weren't human. I was supposed to be traveling throughout the desert with a small team of 5 people, but in the middle of the trip, we all got separated by a brutal sandstorm. I tried to radio my teammates. They answered, trying their best to find out where I was. I kept walking north, the direction we came from. I kept hearing the cries from my other team members over the radio. They were trying their best to find each other as well, but they weren't successful. The storm went on for about half an hour, obscuring everything around me, forcing me to keep my eyes closed most of the time. 20 minutes into the storm, my radio went completely silent. It made a weird interference noise. One I hadn't heard come from the radio before. The radio was still working, but I couldn't reach anybody. No one answered at all. Another 10 minutes later, the storm cleared up. I looked around for any sign of anything. Only sand dunes were around me. I kept walking north. I dreaded the idea that I was going to be too hard to find. About 20 sand dunes later, I noticed something in the distance. A black line with what looked like structures behind it. I needed to get to some sort of civilization soon. I was starting to get hungry. Also, who knows, the rest of the team was probably there too. I picked up my pace, walking towards the structures. As I got closer, I realized it was a walled settlement. The buildings popping up over the wall looked like average 4 to 7-story commercial buildings you'd see in any downtown area. I saw the opening a little bit to my left. When I reached it, it looked a little bit more advanced than it looked from further away. Before I walked into the town, I heard a sound I could barely describe. It was similar to a tuba in a way. I looked behind me to look for its source. A truck shaped like a pentagon was driving towards the town. I stepped back away from the gate. When the truck arrived, it stopped. The passenger of the truck, he didn't look human. He looked like a humanoid giraffe with a huge jaw. It looked towards me. It saw me staring at it. It let out a low growl. I noticed a driver looked exactly like him. He turned to me as well. He let out the same low growl. What is happening? I thought. The two things looked back on the road. They drove into the settlement. It was weird, but I needed some food. I walked through the opening, into town. I ran past the gate as it began to close. I looked forward, into the town. It looked like a regular downtown area, but in the desert. It was confusing. There was no town like this on any map of this desert I looked at. I walked down the sidewalk, looking around for any sign of my other team members. The part of the town I was in was mostly empty, though I did see a car passing by in the distance. As I walked down the street, there was something slightly off about the air. It was kinda different in a way. It didn't solve my hunger though. After some more walking, I came across a convenience store. I walked inside. It was your average convenience store. But the cashier didn't look human. He had the same figure as a human, but he was dark green. He had eyes almost as big as his head. He saw me make eye contact with him, so I looked at the food. It was all wrapped in wrappers with weird symbols and random letters on them. The images of the food weren't bad, but I had not recognized any of it. Since it was convenience store food, I decided to trust it anyway. When I put the food on the desk, the cashier spoke with a metallic purr. It gave me chills, in fact. It was so uncanny. I gave him $10. He made the purr sound again. Also, he never blinked. It was like he was staring at me. He didn't do anything with the cash. I decided to take the cash back. I put it back in my wallet, then I left the store. I continued to walk up the street. I had no idea what place this was. It didn't seem like any sort of dress-up convention. These beings looked too realistic. I had never seen it before. I came across 3 beings standing on a street corner. I was hoping they spoke English. Hi, can any of you tell me where I am? They stared at me. They didn't have eyelids either, so they could have just been confused, I thought. They each made loud noises that sounded like an emergency alert sound. They were chilling. Their eyes dilated until their entire eyes were dark purple voids. I backed away. But then they rushed towards me, pushing me to the ground. Then they pointed at me while making those demonic growling noises. I got up, then I ran away from them. My heart was racing. I began to think I was about to be killed by these things. I didn't know what they were, but they seemed more demonic the more I saw them. I heard multiple footsteps. I looked behind me. A siren started blaring from somewhere behind me. I looked back. A car with flashing yellow lights was getting close behind me. It slowed down as it reached where I was. The passenger windshield rolled down. 2 creatures were in the car. The passenger side creature pointed a gun at me. I ran a little faster, but then my body felt like it had locked up. I fell to the ground. I couldn't move. The dread was building up inside me. A few seconds later, I was pulled up off the ground by the two creatures. They had eyes that stretched all the way around their heads. Green skin too. They held me up against a wall. One of them pulled a shorter creature in front of him. The shorter creature also had green skin, but 4 claws too. The officer creature shot the shorter creature. Then he waved the gun at me, nodding his head. I could only think that he was signaling that I was about to be shot. Chills ran all over me. The dread got deeper as I had nowhere to go without potentially dying. The officer creature holding me against a wall took out a piece of paper. It had a picture of a human on it. He was in a jail cell. Random letters were written above the image. The only thing I could make out was a name, Jack Carlton. The officer growled at me. He pointed towards the cell in the image. The guy must have also stumbled upon this place, then he got arrested. Did all this trouble have to do with the mere presence of a human? I wondered. Humans must be threatening to them, but how? I didn't want to spend my time in a jail in whatever place this was just because I randomly stumbled by. Unfortunately, these beings didn't speak any human language I knew of. The officer clawed at the left side of my head. It hurt badly. I didn't know what they wanted, but I needed to get away from them. The 3 creatures who pointed at me earlier ran up towards me. 2 were carrying batons, 1 was holding a map of the world. I didn't get a good look at the map, but it looked like balkanization had run wild. The dread I felt got worse. The officer creatures walked in front of me. They both charged at the 3 creatures, pushing, whacking, even punching them down to the ground. The creatures were about to attack me, but the officers stopped them. The officers must have thought the 3 were about to attack them. The officers were tackling the 3 creatures on the ground. The creatures and creature cops all growled loudly during their altercation with each other. They began to get into a fist fight too. Amidst that, I decided it was my time to escape. I ran away, filled with adrenaline. I ran past the fence at the town limits. I went back into the desert. I ran down the sidewalk, breathing heavily, wondering if I'd get away alive. As I ran, multiple gunshots rang out behind me. I heard the thud of one bullet hitting the ground right beside me. I ran off the road, deep into the sandy desert. My heart felt like it was beating faster than I could run. I ran for about 10 minutes, only thinking about getting away from the town. To my surprise, I heard someone speak to me through my radio. "Hello? Dapperton? We're still searching for you. If you can hear this, please say copy." I jumped. I took out my radio. I answered the guy on the other end. "Copy. This is Dapperton. I don't know where I am. There was a weird town I was almost arrested in. I was almost killed," I said. "Your location is up on our radar now. My boss picked me up from where he found me." I told him about the town. He told me there was no town in the direction I came from. He showed me a map of the area. No names popped up. I showed him the scar on the side of my head. He was weirded out by it, mostly because there was nothing in the desert that could have given me such a scar, according to him. He didn't believe my story about the creatures or the town. Instead, he looked concerned about whatever idea he had of what may have happened to me while I was off the radar. When I got back home, I looked at the area on Google Maps. I couldn't find any sign of a town anywhere within that area. I looked all over that desert just to make sure the town wasn't there. I looked up Jack Carlton to see if anything would pop up in local news. There was a Jack Carlton who went missing in 2010. Though it stated his body was recovered. He had died of dehydration. However, when I looked at his image, it matched the one the officer creature showed me. Did I go through a dimensional slip? No trace of the town can be found anywhere. Is the town a government cover-up or something? If the missing Jack Carlton is the same one who was arrested by those creatures, then the government covered it up? I'm so confused. I imagined a scenario where I retraced my steps through that desert to see if I'd find the town again. However, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to go back to that town again. In fact, I'm going to stay away from going too far into that desert.